Welcome back to Create Space, a podcast that finds joy in the art of storytelling. Today, we have the amazing privilege and opportunity to discuss a new book with the author himself. Matt Calhoun is a Wichita-based author who published his debut novel, The Knowledge of Sin, just this past year, so in 2022. The Knowledge of Sin is a dystopian science fiction novel that touches on a topic that we are all too familiar with in our own world today, which is that of AI and machine learning. So The Knowledge of Sin asks the question, how far is too far? And what happens when really powerful technology falls into the wrong hands? Now, I have read The Knowledge of Sin, and all I can tell you guys is go read it. It is such a good book. I read it in one single day because as soon as I started, I could not bring myself to stop. It's a really engaging story. The dialogue is smart. The character development is really phenomenal. And honestly, my mind was positively spinning by the end of it. So let's meet Matt Calhoun, learn a little bit more about The Knowledge of Sin, and then talk about what might be coming up next for this up-and-coming author. All right, welcome to the show, Matt. I really appreciate you being here. So for those of you that don't know, I have known Matt now for a lot of years now, since college. So we'll not tell everybody exactly how long that's been for us, but a while. Matt, we're here to talk about your book. This is your first book, The Knowledge of Sin, and from what I understand, not your last, right?
Yep.
So tell us about, just start, before we even get into this book, tell us about your trajectory as an author. When did you decide you wanted to be an author? What do you hope that looks like in the future? What's that all about?
Sure. Yeah, so as long as I can remember, really kind of back to being a kid, I wanted to write, and I think I remember my parents helping me, my mom kind of telling her, hey, I want to make these stories about dinosaurs. And she helped me, I would say the word, she'd write it down, and I'd draw the pictures. And that really kind of evolved, over time. I wrote a lot in kind of high school. I was really into kind of video and things like that. So I did a lot of theater in high school. So I wrote kind of screenplays and some things like that. And got out of college, and I kind of dabbled with longer form stuff, and I thought, well, why not just try something long form? And I'd had some ideas, and started writing The Knowledge of Sin really right around the time I got out of undergrad, and iPhone had just come out. There's a whole lot of really long time ago, and so. And then, got into the writing process of that, and stopped for a really long time, and kind of COVID gave me the push to finish the book, and after that I've just kept going. I'm writing frequently, and I've got several more things that I'm working on.
So I know you have one book that you're in the process of writing, and if I remember right, you said that's going to be a series. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm working right now on a kind of young adult fantasy that'll be a series set. I don't know if COVID gave me this idea, but I've always kind of been fascinated in kind of the kind of medieval plague type stuff, and so I thought, well, why not set a fantasy book in kind of a different world, but that kind of time with magic and things like that. So I tend to write and I like kind of cataclysmic type stuff. So it just kind of fit with what I like to talk about.
Yes, I would say you do like cataclysmic types of things. So we're going to do our best to talk about The Knowledge of Sin and not provide spoilers, because I do want people to read it. Although I will say that if there's interest, a follow-up interview later after, we can at least give a disclaimer and say, if you haven't read it, don't listen to this episode.
Yeah.
Because I really would like to dig into some of the characters and stuff. But let's talk specifically about The Knowledge of Sin. And, well, first, give us a brief overview of what the book's about.
Sure.
And then maybe tell us where that came from in your brain.
Yeah, sure. So, well, first off, the whole it is dystopian. So, we're
Right.
not saying too much that, things don't go great.
Right. It's not a happy, unicorns and glitter story.
Yeah. I think in the blurb on the back, it asks, will this be the savior of mankind, or it doesn't go that way. Just spoiler.
Yeah. Here, let's read the thing on the back. I've got the book right here just for fun. This is the synopsis on the back. So, Liam Carter, an engineer working for an industrial and tech conglomerate, invents a fully automated factory capable of ending the age of human labor. Will his invention be the savior of mankind or the tool of its destruction?
Yes. And so it is really about, so they create the system. What happens after that, it doesn't really stop at factory labor. It kind of spills over, and then it explores that world of they create this technology, they work for this big company, and what happens with that technology in someone else's hands, and how does that go, and what unfolds after that. And the title of the book comes from the quote that's at the front, which is it's an Oppenheimer quote about the people who created the atomic bomb, the scientists, about how they've known sin through their creation of the atomic bomb, and kind of the theme of technology progress, kind of creating something that gets out of control and beyond what the inventor originally contemplated.
Okay, so that's where that idea came from.
Yes.
So I'm going to read this quote too, because I think it's good, and since I have the book here, why not? So this is J. Robert, you said Oppenheimer? Mm-hmm. That's how you say it?
Yep.
Okay, father of the atomic bomb. So he said, in some sort of crude sense, which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose. Yeah, that's the basis of the whole thing.
Yes.
Which I read when I started the book, but you read it before you've read the rest of it, and I didn't go back to look at it. So that's interesting, I think, is that you paint the picture, and I think we all sort of know this, that the people smart enough to make this stuff are not going to be the ones controlling it.
Right.
Right? That you end up with two different people. You have the inventors and the creators, and you have, I don't know what you call the other people, the CEOs, I guess, but the leaders, the people who are the people in power. Did any of that come from things that you've experienced in the real world around you?
I would say, probably more so is, what if this groundbreaking technology is developed, and what if it's in the wrong hands? I haven't personally kind of been at some of those frontiers, but we've all kind of seen that. And then, what happens if the stewards of that they don't have good intentions necessarily? And even if they maybe did originally, do their intentions change once they have this in front of them? What's there to kind of restrict them from having bad intentions?
Right. I suppose we see that historically. We've seen that in many different reigns of power. I mean, not necessarily with robots, but you know what I mean, in different capacities. And when I was reading this, so for the people listening, I was literally real-time texting you as I was reading it, which I have never had the privilege of real-time texting an author as I read their book, and it was so much fun.
It was fun for me too.
But what was interesting is that you made a comment about, I had said something to the effect of, it's not so much that the AI or the robots are what is scary, it's the people in control of the robots. And you commented on the fact that it's also the speed at which the equipment or the machinery or the technology is the word I'm looking for, develops. So yes, in your book there is definitely some malicious intent, obviously, but at the same time, sometimes, like you said, it's almost that it just snowballs to the point that people aren't prepared for it.
Right.
And I wonder, what is so weird to me, and maybe you just have foresight that the rest of us don't have, but you started writing this back, you said, 08, 09, okay? And then you kind of finished writing it in COVID. And remind me, when was this published?
22. Yep,
22,
September,
okay.
yeah.
I knew it was in within the last year, but I knew it didn't just come out. So you published this before the really big AI boom.
Yep.
But is it fair to say you saw it coming?
No, I mean, I had certainly the forum that it's in, I had no idea. Now, when I was writing, I've always kind of followed the field because it's been interesting to me. But I had been going to some conferences. I've done finance work a lot in my career. They were talking a lot about predictive analytics and AI being used to kind of catch fraud and signal fraud. And so some of that informed kind of how I was thinking about this. I actually wrote a short story that was very much on that wavelength based on that. But all the Chat GPT stuff and everything, I totally, didn't see that form, but I did see, AI was getting better, and it wasn't a great leap to say, well, at some point it could get so good that it could, we could be in this position where, you create something that could eliminate labor. And there are plenty of, Star Trek, I think they live in a world where, it's like a utopian, nobody has to work and they can kind of pursue their interests. And so, that's been explored. But this is like, okay, well, we have this, but what if it doesn't go well and the people who control it don't want to let go of the control, and what happens then?
Right. You mentioned like Star Trek and Star Wars because as you mentioned, it's not a new concept, but the movie, maybe it's just because I have little kids, but the movie that I keep going to is WALL-E.
Oh.
and how they're all just like sitting in their chairs, zooming around, like they don't have to do anything. So,
I love WALL-E because there is kind of the dystopian theme there in a kid's movie.
Right?
It's a great movie.
It tackles a lot of big issues in a cute little WALL-E box, which is interesting. Yeah. No, I actually thought about WALL-E a couple of times while reading your book.
High praise.
There you go. So let's go back to how long it took you to write. So you mentioned that you started writing it when we were just barely out of college or almost out of college, and then kind of took a long break and then went back to it during COVID. So I'm curious, two things. One, how much of it was written before and how much of it was written after? And then two, do you write, like, is it written in chronological order? So like if, did you write the first half in 2008 and the second half in 2020? Or is it kind of all mixed up?
Yeah, so as far as like the chronological, this was a learning process for me. So I kind of started out and I'm just like, I started out with the idea, kind of started going and, just blank page, start writing. Mm-hmm. I learned pretty quickly that I don't do well with that, which lots of authors do great stuff. Like I think Stephen King, I think they call it like pantsing, where you basically just like blank page, like crank something out. You are being told the story to yourself as you're writing.
Wow.
I struggle with that. So I am in the outlining camp, like a plotter, I think is what it's called. But
I didn't know there were names for all these.
Yes. And so I do best when I outline. To be honest, a lot of my pause was just, I don't know if I want to do this. Like I got in, I'm like, well, why tell this story? What do I really have to say that's important here? And, you kind of, your perspective changes over time, and it's like, hey, why not? I think I heard somebody say on a podcast, just, we're not really telling brand new stories. We're kind of telling a story in our own way.
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun, but the way you tell it and your characters and kind of your perspective and your voice is what makes it worthwhile. And so that resonated with me. And then just the whole self-publishing movement and, all that was kind of pushed me to like, well, why not? Like I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
I want a good product, but I can whatever I think of, and it's really what sky's the limit. So
yeah, it allowed you to push past that like imposter syndrome kind of feeling.
Yeah, totally. Which is totally a real deal.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just so intrigued because I think of how different I am as a person from 2008 to now.
Yes.
So, and I know you and I are like our lives in terms of like stage of life are pretty parallel.
Right.
So like in 2008, 2009, you weren't married yet. Obviously, no kids yet at that point. And then when you picked it back up at COVID, you were, in lockdown with a wife and two kids and working a full-time finance job. As I was reading the book, I would not have guessed that it was written kind of at different times. Do you feel like your writing style changed over that time? And if it did you have to kind of sort of rewrite parts to make it all fit together?
Well, it's funny you say that because there's a school of thought that you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's not like I set out to let's pause for 8 years.
Right.
And there was a lot of kind of like I'm on a plane, so I'll type a little bit here, kind of in the beginning. The back part was really pretty much in succession. I think I got lucky a little bit.
Yeah.
But I didn't. It didn't really feel disjointed or that something had changed like materially. I think I did those characters are kind of just, they've been in the back of my mind, and that story had been at the back of my mind. And so, there were some things that I maybe had to go back and like rethink. Did I need to introduce this or some plot changes? Because even when I outline, I don't stick to the exact, this chapter's going to do this and this it evolves. So it's like I know where I'm going, but it evolves as I write the chapters. Because even when I sit down and write a chapter, it may say this is kind of generally what's going to happen, but that evolves as I write. And a lot of times the chapter becomes something different, and then that kind of snowballs into the rest of the book.
It feels like it would be hard. I've never written anything long form, and I feel like the hardest part would be building realistic like foreshadowing and things like that, which, like you were saying, the outline method seems like that would make that easier because you know where something's going before it gets there.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like did that take a lot of did you have places where you thought, oh, that's a plot hole, I have to fill that in, or does it come pretty naturally?
There were some things where I had to go back and something was happening later, and I had to kind of figure out how to weave that in. The outline did help because there was a lot of that I'd kind of figured out. Mm-hmm. But there were still, that's still broad strokes, and there's stuff you have to come back around and, I've got to make this point so that it makes sense later. But I'm sure there's probably something in there someone's going to point out that's like, hey, what if this would have happened, But
which is kind of cool because I've even noticed, even as I've been sitting here talking to you about it, more so kind of before we turned on the microphones. But we were talking about the characters or something, and I was talking about what I thought one character would do after the story was over, and I realized that I'm sitting here talking to the author, and I literally said something like, but you never know, he might though, as if you didn't come up with him. So I do feel, which shows, I think, the sign that you wrote really good characters.
Thanks.
Because in my brain, they are these people that I totally can predict their next move. And then I had a moment of, Jessica, he wrote this person.
Yeah. But, well, that's true, but they are their own people. I mean, and I've talked to a few other writers that I don't know, it's going to sound weird, but they have their own personality, their own thoughts. They're kind of, they're not me, but, I created them, but they kind of, when you kind of get into you develop them and their motives, and it's like, okay, well, how would Natalie respond to this?
Right.
And it's not like so much how I would respond, it's how much Natalie's personality would respond. Liam, how much, he may have some things that are like me, but by and large, he's his own person. And, they do kind of take on a life of their own. And I think that helped me kind of pick back up is that they have their, you kind of know what's driving them and their motivations and things like that.
They have their own internal monologue just the same as a regular person does.
Yes.
So that brings me to an important point that I've been dying to just ask, which is let's talk about these characters because I think they're fantastic. So we will have to be careful not to give spoilers, but Can you tell us just a little bit about kind of the main key players in the book and sort of how they developed in your brain? Yeah,
so probably Liam first because he's arguably the most central character, although
he's the guy.
Yeah, but Natalie is up there too. So, but Liam is the creator of the technology. He's kind of awkward with social interaction, very intelligent, questionable work ethic at times. But if he's interested in something, he's gets very involved and motivated. His unique approach to his career and interacting with others has kind of limited him over time.
Right.
But the fact that he's so brilliant and comes up with the stuff has kind of they've like, oh well, we'll keep him on the team because
he can pull it off.
Yeah, he's hard. He can be kind of hard to like. I think at least felt that way writing him. Natalie, who's kind of the other key figure in creating the technology, and then as it evolves, and they kind of transfer it into other applications and. We talked about robots, so not really that big of a spoiler, but eventually the technology kind of transfers into its natural form, which is just, hey, why have a factory that's kind of stagnant? Why not have robots that can do all these other things that the factory it's not as efficient. So she's pretty central in creating the initial technology, and then the robots later. Values are important to her. She's also very intelligent, but she's focused on, is what I'm doing going to help?
Right. She's the virtue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so, they work together a lot. They kind of have a, witty banter every now and then. They've been working together for a while. So they're very important to the book. And then, of course, the leadership team of the company, Raymond Meiser, who's the CEO, who's very gifted speaker. He's a well-respected, CEO in the corporate world, but potentially has some questionable motives.
Mm-hmm. Super charismatic, but kind of evil.
Yeah. And kind of some of his lieutenants, Bill Wallace, I think is one you and I talked about. That's he's a character I like, but he's just he's very cunning, and so those are probably the big ones, at least kind of in the first part of the book, where things are, the narrative around the technology and the company is kind of evolving.
Yeah. And what I love about the characters is that, and I mentioned this to you, is that I love a good, well-rounded character that's not all bad and not all good. And I think arguably, at least in my brain, you've kind of got two characters that are sort of polar as kind of almost all bad and almost all good. But Bill Wallace, I would put in this category. Liam, for sure, I'd put in this category of you mentioned Liam's not super likable, which I would agree with, but he's also not easy to hate. He's very real. Natalie is the virtue, but he has the virtue in him from the very beginning. It's the reason that he drinks, right? Is that he knows that there's a possibility that his brilliant mind could be used for evil.
Right.
It's just that he doesn't necessarily act on,
Yes.
But it's in there, which I think is cool. And then with Bill Wallace, I went back and forth on, is he cunning and borderline evil, or is he just kind of a cog and acting in, on behalf of Meiser? And I still don't know if I can decide. I mean, he definitely stands alone on his own in a few places, but they're very deep, and I like struggling over a character.
Right.
I like going, I don't know how I feel about this person, because Liam's the lead, but I don't know that I'd call him the protagonist necessarily.
Right. Right.
Is there a word? I think there's probably a an author word here for a protagonist that's also kind of anti-hero? Is that kind of what I'm thinking of here?
Yeah, but I think what you're hitting on, is that's what we try and do. Is it's most of all they're kind of a realistic person, and a lot of people would say that, people that talk about writing, that you don't really want the kind of, vanilla, this person is always all good, and, that kind of thing. So, it helps you kind of identify, and, even when someone's unlikable, I think I've heard, I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, if you have a villain that people can kind of identify with how they made that decision, and Bill Wallace is kind of in that camp, because it's like, you could see, well, if I was in his spot, would I, or even Liam, would I have made some of these decisions, or just not made a decision, and kind of things evolved along that path.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's funny. I'm just thinking the episode of this podcast that featured two guys who have their own podcast called The Artist Blend, and I think it's episode 17. We were talking about villains specifically on that episode because they're both music theater majors, and so they have, was asking them how they develop a role, and we were talking about villains and how in order for a villain to be believable, they have to be justified. In their brain, the villains don't think they're the villains typically.
Right.
There's a reason they're doing it. And I feel like I felt that in every, even Meiser, even him, I feel like he knew he wasn't doing good for everybody, and that didn't bother him. But he thought he was doing some good for society, right? The overall goal, he's still justified in its brain, even at its worst, which is really cool. So that brings me, first of all, I feel like I'm going to spend way too much time on this podcast talking about my opinions of your book and my philosophy on it.
You're getting it so well.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe you're articulating it better than I can, probably.
Oh, hey, well, okay. I don't know if that's true. But so one thing that I remember I mentioned to you is, I read this book, I'll be honest with you, I read it because you wrote it. Normally, I would not consider myself a sci-fi person, and I wouldn't think I probably wouldn't have picked this up off the shelf and said, oh, I'll probably read this. But then when I got into it, I went, oh, this is so not what I expected. Because when I hear sci-fi, I think more fantasy, zombies, aliens, whatever. And while, yes, the stuff in here has not happened, and hopefully it won't happen the way that it happens in this book, there's so much realism to it. It never, even in part 2, when things really start heating up, there's always a sense of very eerie realism to it. I'm curious how you were able to write that sense of realism into a technically fictional book.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always really don't get me wrong, I like the kind of out there, aliens, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I like the superhero stuff, and so I like all that stuff too. But I also have always really appreciated the sci-fi, and there is quite a bit out there that is kind of in that zone of, well, this is believable, or this isn't that far off. Mm-hmm. I think there are some things that, like, Philip K. Dick, who's one of my favorite, has kind of written things that aren't so much of a leap and kind of that evolution. And so that was just something I was important to me, is it's not too futuristic of a world where, it's hard, like there's, flying cars, and although I suppose that's not that far away either, maybe, but
they probably could have.
Yeah. But just, they're not, living in space and, laser swords and things like that, but that you could kind of live in that world, or say, like, oh yeah, that's not hard for me to believe that this technology could exist. And, certainly when I started writing it and thought of the technology, it was far away. And in fact, when I was talking to people about it really early on, they're like, well, oh, this is way in the future. It's not so much now, but it certainly was, back then.
Yeah. Which, when I say that I'm not typically a sci-fi fan, but I'll be curious to see, because your next series is a lot more, magic based and things like that. But I'm for sure going to read it because I'm a Matt Calhoun fan now.
Thank you.
I'm curious to find out, because yes, this was kind of more based in realism, but at the same time, though, you built the world, right? Even though it was a world that is eerily reminiscent to our own, you still built the world. Like, I felt like I understood UIG. I was a part of that. Right. So who knows? I might get into this woodland fairy magic stuff and be like, you know what? Maybe I am a sci-fi fan, because I think that's what it's all about, is world building, right? You have to be able to construct the space in which these characters live and have it all make sense together.
Right.
And something that I thought was really cool, you were talking about like flying cars or whatever, just all these things that we don't know about. I thought it was cool, and I'm going to try to say this in a way that doesn't spoil, but there's a part in part 2 where they're trying to escape, get away from something. And what I thought was interesting is that the way that they got away it wasn't like, let's pull out our jetpacks that we didn't tell you we had, but because we live in a futuristic world, we have them, so we can totally do that. But it was like, here, what's keeping us in is a technology that you already know about, and the way we're going to get out is in a way that makes sense to fight that technology. And I know that doesn't make sense to people who haven't read it. I'm wondering if you can tell which part I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know exactly which part. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just thought that was really cool, that it always stays within the realm of what my brain goes, oh, yeah, that makes sense. If I was in that situation, I see how that would work, as opposed to where you can sometimes tell when an author goes, I've got them stuck in a position and I don't know how to get them out, so let's just make something up and have it work. And I never felt that in your book, which I thought was really cool. So, okay, you were telling me, let's move on, because I get stuck in talking about the story itself, but you just released within the last month, I believe, the audiobook came out. Is that right?
Now, I've been working on it so me and the narrator kind of started the process. I think it was, really kind of early in the year.
Yeah.
Started auditions and all that stuff.
So, okay, the audiobook just got released, and your narrator is Brian Applegate.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about him and about the process of working on the audiobook.
Yeah, so I got really lucky because I did the audiobook through ACX, which is a Amazon basically marketplace for matching authors and narrators together. And so I opened the book for audition. I was like, not really sure what to expect. And I got some good auditions, but when I was just kind of waiting, and I remember I was talking with my wife about, should I make a decision? And she was like, just, keep it open and, let's just see what comes out. And when I heard Brian's audition, I was like, okay, that's it for me. And I showed it to, I would let Kara listen to the audition, and she's like, oh yeah, you should go. And so I immediately, we started chatting and just kind of emailing back and forth. And it was also really cool, his process, and I had no idea what to expect because I'm, first-time author, first time working on an audiobook. He asked me, hey, how should I pronounce things? Which, that makes sense. But then for all the characters, who would you cast them as if you made a movie? Which I'm really into movies, and I've always kind of enjoyed that. So that was a lot of fun for me, but I also kind of agonized over it for a bit before I sent it to him. But he did a really great job narrating, and then also the characterization stuff, where it's just even some things where I didn't give him input, but just what he did was awesome. What he did with like the robot voices and stuff like that is one of my favorite things.
Oh, I didn't even think about the robot voices. Oh.
Yeah. And I didn't tell him, and I was a little bit worried too, because I'm like, I don't want it to sound like a cheesy robot, and he just did something that was like completely not what I was expecting, but it was just awesome.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it, because that would be a hard one to get right.
Yes.
Wow.
And he also, it's not like one robot voice. They depending on the situation and like the application, they have different kind of personalities almost, which is cool.
Oh, yeah, that is cool.
Yeah.
So can you tell us then, since Brian asked you the question and you've agonized over it, who would you cast?
Okay.
Celebrity-wise, who's your Liam? Who's your Natalie?
Yeah. There was lots of, in some sense, I thought about like, okay, sound and personality versus like how they look. So just like kind of keep that in mind. But and Kara and I, my wife, we fought the most over, because I kind of bounced things off of her. Liam was who we fought the most over.
Oh.
But we eventually, I think it was like a progression of me kind of changing what I wanted, because she was like, no, that's not good. But I landed on Jake Gyllenhaal for Liam.
Okay.
Like probably younger Jake Gyllenhaal,
So I could see that. Who else was up in the air for, like, who were you guys thinking about?
So
do you remember?
I had early on, I think I said like Andrew Garfield, or like I can't remember his name, but he's have you seen like the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man? He's like the Green Goblin.
Oh,
I can't remember his name, but
I
liked that guy, but Kara's like, nah, I don't think so.
And I feel like Jake Gyllenhaal and Andrew Garfield, I can see both. Like, I could see both of them.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay, what about Natalie?
So Natalie, we ended up, and we pretty much agreed on this pretty quickly. Natalie Portman was kind of...
Yeah, she really does. Yeah. Did you think about that at all when you were naming Natalie? Or is that just total coincidence?
No.
Because really, now that you say that, that's actually, it feels like a really perfect fit.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, who do we have left?
I like talking about... So Bill Wallace, who's the COO of UIG, and we've talked a lot about him. Walt Goggins.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
He does a lot of. Did you see Justified, the show?
No.
Okay, so he's kind of like the villain,
right,
and I'm trying to think of. He was in some Marvel movies. He's been in a whole bunch of stuff. He's always like he's kind of like a country guy, but very like refined.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I know his face. Okay.
Yes.
I don't know that I've seen a lot of his movies, but I definitely know his face. Oh, as Bill Wallace. Okay. Yeah.
And mainly like his kind of mannerisms and voice.
Last couple of questions. You came into this, yes, you had done some creative work. You kind of had a knowledge of sort of the creative industry, but at the same time, you still are working a full-time job, a business job, and also being a dad and also being a husband. How did you find the time, and also how did you figure out all of this stuff about self-publishing and getting an audiobook narrator, and how did you do all of that?
Yeah, balancing act for sure, but I would say I got a lot more disciplined. You kind of find time, and that was my thing. Is once I kind of got in the groove of here's the outline, and I kind of sit down and I know what I'm going to do, and then I think I'd heard somebody say like just sit down and write your draft and be okay with it, not being exactly don't go back and edit this word, just write it.
Just get it out, basically.
And so I kind of got in that mantra of I'm going to get this draft out, and I did, and I knew it. So I kind of set up times where it was like 30 minutes a day, And I got kind of into a rhythm of, you get out 500 words or something like that in 30 minutes. Well, that adds up over time, and, eventually you got a book. The self-publishing side, it looks like I kind of knew what I was doing, but there's a lot of learning and figuring out, and it's still happening. That's the double-edged sword. I mean, when you're independent, published, you have complete control over what you're putting out there. That can be good and bad. I mean, I certainly got a lot of feedback from people as I was working on it, but you make mistakes.
Right, sure.
I'm sure I've made some. I'm sure I'll make some more. But I heard a lot of people talk about getting it out there, getting feedback, learning, developing your voice, and I've just been kind of focused on that. And so it's like that book and those characters are great, and I'm got them out, and moving on to the next thing, and that's been a lot of it. Just keep moving and keep writing the next thing.
Yeah. So as you've been doing all of this, we've mentioned Kara, your wife's role in it a little bit as a support, but I know like the acknowledgments page has a whole list of people. Yeah. So talk a little bit about the support around you as you've been pursuing your dreams of being an author.
Yeah, sure. Well, a lot of people read it and, gave feedback, or proofread or helped with editing. And that has been incredibly important. That was really helpful to kind of get feedback. And, the way I went about it is, okay, if one person, says this, I'll think about it. But if I hear like all of them are saying, hey, you should really think about this, or that doesn't really make sense, then I really need to go address it. So that was really helpful. And
so did you have a formal editor? I don't really know how this works. Do you have like somebody who's considered the editor, or is it just kind of you've passed it on to several people, or what's the process there?
Yeah, so I did kind of the beta round. I did an editor, and then, I did proof basically.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I mean, that's, some people will do like a development edit at the beginning, which is more focused on the story.
Gotcha.
And I kind of relied on, beta reader feedback for that.
So it's kind of a back and forth.
Yeah.
Now that the book is published, it's out there, you can't really change it.
Right.
Is there anything that you wish that you would have changed if you could?
That's a good question. I have kind of looked at it like it's an iterative process, and, I got it out there. I'm happy with how it turned out. Whatever I'd change, I'd kind of incorporate into the next thing.
Gotcha.
It's like that's there. I got it out, and I'm just learning and moving it, incorporating it going forward.
So I know the book you're working on now is meant to be a series. Would you ever consider a sequel to The Knowledge of Sin?
Yeah, I've thought about it, and it's certainly, the story goes there where it could.
It leaves there's a moment where it's not full closure for sure.
Yeah. But right now it's I'm thinking about it as a standalone, but I've left it open where I could either kind of continue the story in that universe, or kind of go spend more time with other characters that were kind of, their story wasn't fully explored, or like what happened to these people that really weren't central to the book, but in the book's events. So I've thought about that, but I haven't. I'm not set on it yet.
Yeah. You know who I am curious about, and maybe this is one of the side characters you were talking about, is April. She came in for like a second and had a moment, and then we don't hear from her again. And part of me, which I knew, she's a side character. It didn't feel like a hole or a gap, but a part of me was like, whatever happened to April? Like, what's her story? Yeah. I was just because for a second, I thought you were introducing her as a secondary, like, love interest. And I was kind of like, I don't know that I like this. Yeah. And so I was kind of happy when that didn't necessarily go that route. But I was kind of curious about her. So I do appreciate, I feel like, we say it doesn't end with a ton of closure, but it also doesn't end like a major cliffhanger, like when a TV show gets canceled and you can tell they meant for there to be another season. There is closure where it could be standalone, but there's enough where I thought, I would love to hear what happens next after that.
Yeah, that was what I was. I can't say I set out to do that, but I do like that.
Yeah.
It can stand alone, but if I wanted to revisit it, I could.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks
Is there anything else? I've asked you a lot of questions here. Is there anything else you'd like to share or mention with the time that we have together today?
Sure, yeah. If people are looking for how to find me, mattcalhounauthor.com. You can find my books on Amazon under Matt Calhoun. I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook page, Instagram. Also from my website, you can get to all those things. And then Goodreads.
Perfect. We'll put links to all of those in the show notes so people can kind of just click through there.
Fantastic.
And yes, if you are listening, please do read the book because I really do want to do a follow-up episode where we can just talk all the spoilers and get into all the maybe we can even, it would be fun, have people who've read it call in or leave voice messages about their thoughts on some of the,
I love that
characters.
idea.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That's cool. I hadn't even considered it, but I'm in.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so if you're listening, you have to read it and then get in touch with me and we'll make this happen because that would be my favorite episode in the whole entire world.
I'm down.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
you.
Thank you for having me, Jessica.
Okay, guys, I am not kidding about this follow-up episode. We have to make this happen. So here is my ask for this episode. First of all, if you haven't yet, go read The Knowledge of Sin. I have the links to Amazon as well as Goodreads and Matt's website and Instagram and Facebook, all of that in the show notes. So go and get yourself a copy of the book, read it, and then once you finish reading it, send me either an email or a voice message and tell me what you thought about the book. Tell me, what questions that you have, what characters were your favorite, did you have any specific thoughts about the plot or the characters, etc. Whatever that you want to say or additional information that you would like to know. So then what I'll do is I will collect all of that feedback and Matt and I can build a follow-up episode based on that. And I think that would be so cool, especially if you send a voice message using my SpeakPipe software that is linked in the show notes. Then we can actually put your question or your comment on the episode live as well. So please do that. I think that would be so much fun. Thank you again to Matt for joining us today. Of course, thanks to all of you for listening. And I will see you all next week on Create Space.